democracy for the people of Granby and Dominica. The struggle continues for electoral reform. Presentations by DFP, NJAM, Rosy Sparks, UWP, CCI,
Mantra, you should mute your mic.
War, A New Beginning,
Mute your mic, Mantra.
Lally,
Only
Grambe,
coming to your
4:30
people.
p.m.
Mute your mic.
Lally, Grambe,
Could you hear me?
4:30
No, you should
p.m.
mute your mic. Turn off your mic. Mute it.
Yes, to mute it.
A global view on Q, the big station. Insights into where the people of Dominica and the Caribbean came from, understanding our past, embracing our present, charting the way forward into our future. Together, eliminating poverty.
So good evening to you in Radio Land and internet world at home and abroad. Very pleasant good evening to you, Lambi, to Sherwin in the studio in Dominica. And thank you tonight for choosing Q95. This is the Global View on Q. A very, very warm welcome to all of our Q family listeners at home and globally. I'm Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G. It's Tuesday, 12th March already, 12th March 2024. The 11th Tuesday of 2024, and it's 8 p.m. precisely, just about 8 or 2 p.m. in fact, in the studios at Q95, the big station. We're live on our radio frequencies, on QTV, on Facebook, and on YouTube. Follow us at Q95 FM Radio. Share the live, like our pages, on your phone numbers are on the homepage of our website at www.q95da.com. Get the latest breaking news and reviews on Q, because you know it's true if you hear it on Q. We continue to revive the spirit of graciousness, of love and peace, prosperity and unity among our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. I just want to a little note here. I've been asked to say that Granby will in fact be host to the fourth National Assembly of the Electoral Reform Coalition. I know that Granby people are very hospitable people, and they will give all the people who come up there on Sunday a very warm welcome. And so we look forward to seeing Granby, very colorful with quite a few guests that are going to be talking about electoral reform. I mean, this is, I think, the fourth assembly that they're having. The last one was on the riverbank in Roseau. I believe that they've also asked me to say that people can start making their contributions, because, whenever you have those assemblies, you always have some costs to do with stage, to do with sound and lights and, PA systems and so on. And also, obviously, the other expenses. So they've asked me to say that anyone who wants to now, from tonight, in fact, they can go to the Nidcliffe website, www.nidclf.org, and they can make a donation there. So it's at www.nidclf.org, and they can make a contribution. But there are many other ways that you'll be able to make contributions. There is going to be a sort of a press con tomorrow afternoon from 1 to about 3 o'clock, and the organizers will then give you a lot more information as to how you can make a contribution to this assembly on Sunday afternoon from about 4 to 4:30 p.m. in Granby in the South City. So it is, in fact, our 11th Global View on Q for 2024, and tonight I think we're going to have a great conversation with you, our Q family listeners and friends of Dominica worldwide, on live radio at www.q95fm.2q95ga.com, on Facebook, on YouTube at Q95FM Radio. And our distinguished guest, of course, Dr. Irving Andre, Mr. Crispin Gregoire, Perez, Saint-Hilaire, Martin, Manchild, Henry, Mr. Urban Manai Dangleman. A very, very warm welcome to all of you distinguished gentlemen, illustrious sons of Granby and Portsmouth. Tonight, it's all about Granby. In the rearview mirror, I will outline a few talking points for starters, and I will leave the substantive details of these and the rest of the talking points to you, my learned colleagues, on the panel tonight, and your callers and viewers. So tonight, we will revisit the great history of Granby and observe a commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the Geneva Uprising that changed the ownership of the Geneva estate, which initiated access to lands by the people of Granby. We acknowledge that Granby has played a major role in the development of Dominica and produced and demonstrated leadership in the political, cultural, sports, and music realms, among others. I believe if the younger generations of Granbarians know their history, it will help them determine and craft their destiny, where they should be headed, and what is the best path, of course, for them to take in terms of how to get there. So I have a few questions tonight, and I'm just going to put this to our panelists as we go along. We'll discuss some of them, and I know you have all yours and your contributions as well. So my first question, will Granby take the lead again in resurrecting resilient resistance and purposeful engaged proactivity? What does Granby's history say about its people? Is the soul of Granby gone, or is it still there? Maybe it needs reawakening. Where is the legacy of Orion, of Matutu, of UNICEF, of Manchild, Perez, Duggan? You know, it's a George and Mrs. George, era George and Mrs. George, John Fabian, Pierre Charles, Ed Regis, James Alexander, Lambert Henderson, and others. We had the footprints of Pierre Charles and Rosie Douglas, Bernard Wilshire, and others who took up the mantle for change. Is Granby ready to embrace the spirit of Chubby and Midnight Groovers as enshrined in the songs Coco Sec and Anita? We have the spirit of La Jeune Étoile and the movement for a new Dominica gone. Is Granby ready to reclaim its history of rebellion against oppression? Is Granby ready to lead the struggle for true independence, for equality and equity? Is Granby ready to embrace its history of struggle and take the lead in securing electoral reforms to ensure a level playing field for free and fair elections in Dominica? We will hear authentic historical voices from Granby tonight. Hopefully, we will then have a greater appreciation of our sons of the soil on the panel tonight. Dr. Andre, of course, is one of our Dominica's greatest advocates, urban Manai Dangleban, a leader in the radio communications with Radio Abamago, among other things. Perez Centilli has led sports and music, also the author of a book titled My Identity. Manchild Henry is author of a book, A Brief History of Granby. And Mr. Crispin Gregoire, of course, is no stranger to any Dominicans at home and abroad, the former Dominican ambassador to the United Nations. So tonight we present a short history of Granby and the Geneva estate, and I will ask Dr. Irving Andre and Mr. Crispin Gregoire to take the lead when we do so, in doing so, when they make their introductory remarks, and hopefully reference the James Porter Lockett and family era, where the purchase of the estate by the merchant family Elias Nassif. I mean, before the purchase of the estate by the merchant family of Elias Nassif, the role of E.C. Loblack, who organized the Granby farmers and agitated for land for the people. My panelists and our callers will tell their own story. We will revisit the fight for the Geneva estate, which revealed that sometimes just one ordinary person can do extraordinary things for an entire community and to set an historical lead example to an entire nation. We will delve into the period from 1974 to today's date and examine how the people of Granby have progressed, especially during the past 24 years, which Granby has been a very, very strong supporter of the current regime in office. We'll examine the post-Geneva era and see how it relates to what is taking place in Granby and in Dominica by extension today. And we'll see the possibilities of the current generation of leaders in Granby, learning from the lessons left behind by the leaders of the historical Geneva Uprising and the post-Geneva era. We'll also revisit the leadership produced by Granby in creating greater political awareness and the evolution of Granby as a cultural capital of Dominica, building of a financial foundation in the community, linkages to Granby diaspora, and by no means least, historical educational attainments of the people of Granby. We will demystify the post-Geneva Uprising, which produced and developed legendary community and national leaders, and saw the establishment of major music groups and musicians, sports teams like Bata Pros, cultural groups, literary groups, popular independence groups, Matutu Spark, the Geneva Playing Field, promotion of the patois language and sense costumes, all sporting, social, and cultural attributes of Granby. Our panelists will speak about the social, political, and cultural leaders that Granby has produced, like Nick Liverpool, Adriana Henderson, fondly known by Dominicans As Teacher Addy, Pierre Charles A.A.K. Pero, people like Lambert Henderson, among many others. So we'll also delve into the many leading community groups that were formed and thrived in that era, some of which still exist today, as well as the personalities that emerged. We will also look at the extraordinary imposition of non-Granby residents as a candidate in the last election, which many people of Granby considered to be maybe a huge travesty. We look forward to some suggestions as to the way forward that the new generation may wish to consider on how they can play a meaningful role in the securing appropriate reforms of Dominica's electoral and campaign finance laws and regulations to secure free and fair elections on a level playing field. Tonight, I trust that my distinguished guests will make suggestions as to where Granby and Dominica should go from here to see Granbarians and Dominicans prosper, rather than continue to see more land grabbing by foreign nationals, millions of dollars being sent out by the foreign contractors and workers, while Dominican entrepreneurs and our very talented youth are displaced and are losing their heritage as they stand aside and look at money simply passing them by and going away. We will examine why it is imperative that we embrace national unity again, all hands on the same deck to secure good and caring governance in our native isle and enable us to make ourselves truly economically independent in a democratic environment as we see Dominicans now feeling a really painful pinch in their pockets. So my distinguished guests tonight, Dr. Irving Andre, Crispin Gregoire, Perez, Saint-Hilaire, Manchild, Urban Manai Dangben, and you, our cherished listeners, our viewers and callers, especially the people of Granby at home in Dominica, in the region and globally, will call and help us expand and broaden the dialogue and opine on the merits and demerits of what we are witnessing in Granby and in Dominica by extension today in comparison to what existed and transpired some 50 years ago in Granby and in Dominica as a whole. So we invite you, OQ family, friends of Dominica, to stay with us on our radio and television frequencies in Dominica, on our live stream on internet at www.q95da.com, on Facebook and on YouTube platforms, and have your say as you do every Tuesday with me, Mr. G, on the Global View on Q only on Q95, the big station. Our usual huge shout out, hugs, love, appreciation, and a big thank you to healthcare providers, our frontline workers, police and fire officers, teachers, doctors, nurses, public and private sector patriots at home and abroad. We welcome every Dominican and friend of Dominica to the Global View on Q. We embrace you wherever you are tonight. Every nook and cranny in every village, every community at home in Dominica, in the region and globally. Thank you, Sherwin, again for keeping us on the air. Thank you, Lambi, on the console, directing the telephone calls traffic. We will take your calls a bit later. The people's voice is always a priority on the Global View on Q. So do call us anytime during the program. Lambi will take your calls. He will signal us whenever you call. So let's get started. Consummate historian Dr. Irving Andre, former Dominican ambassador to the UN, Crispin Gregoire, will have the first word, and they will make their first 5-minute opening presentations, getting the ball rolling in our conversation tonight. Our other panelists will do the same thereafter, and then we'll all have a great Dominican family conversation and engagement and learn lessons, I believe, from our extraordinary past accomplishments with a focus on Granby as we commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Geneva Granby Uprising, which can hopefully inspire us all to translate that great historical experience into taking meaningful actions now for the future of all of our beloved communities, our homeland Dominica as a whole, and set the path to a more meaningful future for upcoming younger generations. So I now circle back to you, Dr. Andre, for your opening remarks.
Let me say good evening, Mr. G, and let me thank you for inviting me to break bread, intellectually speaking, with such an illustrious panel. I think it is really good to have these luminaries from Granby on your program, and hopefully this is just a happy prologue to a swelling act. In other words, this is just an initiative which will be replicated many times into the future. Let me say good evening to your listeners. Let us cut to the chase. The history of Granby, and by extension Dominica, is stained by the blood of our forefathers. Now, Granby is a particularly interesting area for historical scrutiny because much of Granby's history revolves around what became known as the Geneva estate. And let me just give you a very quick thumbnail history of it. The estate, the genesis goes back to 1691, where a Martinican mulatto fellow came to the area, and he purchased land over the subsequent years. And furthermore, on about 1747, he sold his holdings to a priest. And here's one of the cruel ironies of slave ownership and plantation in the islands: the role of priests in the enslavement and in the so-called conversion of slaves to the cause of Catholicism. But Lars Valette actually became the owner in 1747. He came with a few slaves, but one of the things that he's known for is that on about 1747 or thereabouts, he went to Barbados disguised as a buccaneer, in other words, a thief, and he purchased 200 African slaves from Barbadian slave owners, and he brought them back to Granby in 2 years later in 1749. And suffice it to say that the history of slave resistance in Granby started soon after the importation of so many slaves. I can indicate to you that by 1764, after slave revolts during the 1751 or thereabouts, he sold the holding to English owners. It is believed, or it is claimed by the Lockhart family, that their involvement with Geneva started on or about 1763. But a more accurate historical accounts suggest that one of their forebears purchased the estate in on about 1823, 1844, and that's the famous, or should I say the infamous, James Porter Lockhart. Very interesting fellow, and he embodied all the vices of slave ownership. That is to say, he took advantage, sexually speaking, of all the women slaves he could lay his hands on, and when he tired of them, he either recommitted them to slaves or he gave them a hut, and some limited privileges on the estate. Suffice it to say that the Lockhart family continued to own the estate until on or about 1948 or thereabouts, when the estate was sold to Elias Nassif. And on purchasing, I should indicate that before that sale in 1932, Granbarians revolted and burnt down the estate house of Geneva Estate, again because of the onerous land policies of the then owner. Again, the problem with ownership in Granby was that the Lockhart family, particularly in the 20th century, they leased much of the land, or a fair amount of the land, to Granbarians to cultivate those lands for themselves. So by 1950 or thereabouts, you had generations of Granbarians who would work particular sections of the estate, provided for their families and so on. And Elias Nassif, in retrospect, made a cardinal mistake. What he did was that he sought to get back those leased lands, those lands which had been cultivated by Granbarians for decades, much to the consternation and anger of Granbarians. I can indicate, and you made mention of Mr. Low Black, he took up the cause of Granbarians. He'd been from Granby, quite frankly. The colonial government was not very sympathetic to him. And even after Nassif initiated that policy of trying to recover the lands, in the early 1850s, Granbarians revolted and protested against the diminution of their way of life, of the ability to provide for themselves and their family. And that remained a simmering sore, a simmering problem medically and politically and socially in the Granbarian community until the 1970s. We all know what happened in the 70s. We all know the rising political ferment. We all know about the espousal of social democratic ideas. We all know about the movement for New Dominica. We all know about the formation of popular independence committees by Rosie Douglas and also by Bernard Wiltshire. We know of the role of the PIC in the achievement of political independence. We know that when the House of Assembly passed the legislation with respect to independence, Rosie summoned a whole slew of young Granbarians who had been nursed in the bosom of radicalism in the 70s, who marched on to Roseau, thereby making the attainment of political independence a fait accompli. But we also know that before the attainment of political independence in 1974, we know of what happened on or about in February of 1974, when there was a slew of criminal acts, quite frankly, and there was the death of one or two visitors from the United States, Canadian couple brutalized and so on, and the Granbarian people led by local Granbarians, actually. The most popular, the name we most fully recognize is the one called UNICEF, but there were other Granbarians who were very much sensitized by the systemic or endemic poverty, by the deprivation of land, by the unfairness of Granbarians not being able to have a decent living while you have a big estate, like a giant snake strangling the very innards of that community. Suffice it to say that the Grand, and I'm obviously summarizing what happened, they took up arms and they seized the estate. And as they say, the rest is history. But that did not cause the end or the cessation of activities in Grand Bay insofar as liberation is concerned. We know, obviously, of the plethora of community groups. We know of Jean Etoile, we know of Trade Bell, we know of the physical, we know of the cultural upheaval in Grand Bay, which basically marked a repudiation of all those Eurocentric values that we hugged so closely. And we know what happened to Philip Marx, Chubby. We know he was arrested for stealing, allegedly, a coconut from the estate. And that symbolized everything that was oppressive about the whole question of land ownership in Grand Bay. And obviously, he was imprisoned, although he was released sometime after. But that song you played earlier in your program, Mr. G, Pouan Coco, became the rallying cry, the anthem of a kind of liberation movement that not only was evident in Grand Bay, but also in other parts of Dominica, quite frankly. We also know about the cultural flowering. We know about the activities of many of the cultural groups. You've mentioned some of them already. We know about the leadership of some of the elder or older female statespeople in Grand Bay, people like Oriane, people like Matutu, again espousing a kind of liberation theology based on the indigenous song, the indigenous dance, the indigenous expression of freedom, and all that flowered, it blossomed in the 1970s. And the question we probably now have to face is, where has all the flowers gone? What happened to that flowering and that rebirth, the rebirth of Grand Bay? Where is it? We know that from 2000, Grand Bay has been held in the clutches of the Dominica Labour Party, and it will be for my fellow panelists to tell us what does Grand Bay have to show for it in 2024. Perhaps Granbarians today are energized by that sweet smell from the Geneva apartments. Who knows? Whether or not it's sweet, I don't know. My friend Perez, who is laughing contentedly, will tell us whether I'm wrong about those sweet smells. Where has all that energy, that enthusiasm, that leadership, where has it gone? Has it disappeared for a mess of potage? Are we just content just to accept the little pittances handed out? Probably a few sheets of galvanized here, a few $100 there, and we suffer for the rest of the 4 or 5 year tenure of the incumbent? What has happened? Do we march to a different drum, or do we pick homage to a different god, the god of mammon, the god of self-interest? Grand Bay has played a seminal role in Dominica's historical resistance. The question for Granbarians today, and I will let them, those esteemed members of this panel, to answer. Are they ready to play that seminal role that they played so many decades ago? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Andre, for your opening remarks. I think you did give us a ball by ball some of the history. I hope I will hear when we hear from Perez and from Mancha, he'll tell us whether everything you said is accurate, whether they have some differences of opinion or facts or timelines. They will tell us. But I want to go now to Crispin. Crispin, let's continue where Dr. Andre left off. Let's just develop as we go along. Because listen, one of the things I'm finding out every time I talk of and I do research on Granby is really a very colorful community. I mean, that's a colorful history, a rich, colorful history, and it's produced some fantastic people. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, good evening, Mr. G. Thank you for this episode of Global View dedicated to the 50th anniversary of the Geneva Uprising. Good evening to the esteemed panelists. With the exception of my good brother, Dr. Andre, everybody else is from Guambe. Guambe Monsorti, right? That's the mantra.
True.
And I want to say good evening to all the listeners of this program at home and abroad. Dr. Andre has really given us a really concise historical framework, and I will not attempt to compete with Dr. Andre here, but I want to say some things on the historical side. To start off, I would say that the Geneva Uprising of 1974, which I was privileged to witness before I migrated in 1975 to the US to study, that uprising, which is exactly 50 years this month of March, because the uprising took place over a period of about 6 to 7 weeks. We can even go earlier. The week of Carnival, and then Carnival was the last week of February that year, and all of March and into April, maybe into the middle of April. I would say that this uprising is probably the most significant historical development in Dominica in the second half of the 20th century. That's the second half of from 1950 to 2000. Why do I say that? Well, it is the only event in the post-emancipation history of Dominica where the plantocracy was violently overthrown by the common people. This has not happened anywhere in the Caribbean, anywhere in this post-slavery societies. And the Geneva Uprising, for me, emerged much like a thief in the night in March, April of 1974. Nobody in Granby at the beginning of 1974 had any thought about challenging the dominance of the landlord Elias Nassif until the return from St. Thomas of our brother and immigrant Philip Francis, also known as UNICEF. UNICEF single-handedly changed the entire framework of Granby in a matter of weeks. I should say that Geneva Estate had problems before 1974. We can go back. Dr. Andre talked about the slavery period, and I should tell you that Geneva averaged about 300 enslaved Africans per year. And we have that data from the 1820 to the end of slavery in 1834. So on an average, 300 slaves, enslaved Africans. And before 1974, we had the 1844 census riots. In fact, Granby was the center of this 1844 census riots. And when I think of 1844 and 1974, there are so many parallels of what happened. What happened in 1844 basically repeated in 1974. In 1932, as Dr. Andre mentioned, there was an incident between the Granby people and the then owners, the Lockhart family, over tenancy rights. and that escalated into widespread arson and fire. What was not well known at the time in 1974 was that the seeds of the uprising were actually sown in 1949 when the previous landlord, the Lockhart family, and you know, the Lockharts were in Grand Bay for a long time, 129 years. They sold the estate to Elias Nassif. And immediately, Mr. Nassif adopted a policy of evicting tenants. And the most painful of those evictions was the eviction of those who had houses in a section of Grand Bay called Highland. And, you know, when I was born in 1956, and by the time I got to the age of 5, I had already learned about what had happened to these people who were evicted at Highland. And many of them had to find their way to Lally. And then, of course, those people who had tenant farms were evicted as well. And I'll tell you that was discussed in the British Parliament in 1951. And it is from the British Parliament that we learn that it was over 200 people who were evicted on that estate. It's important also to point out what was really Lally, what was really Grand Bay before 1974. It was literally a little strip of land bordered by 2 ravines. One is the Ambasso River, and the other one is the Berwickwa ravine. That was what was Grand Bay, really. And there were a couple of villages close by called Hagley and Wavin Banan, and then you go up to Grand Colibri. But all of Grand Bay was really Geneva Estate. And Geneva Estate came up all the way to the ravine, the Berwickwa ravine. What is also not well known is that in Low Black's attempt, leadership and organizing of the Grand Bay workers, the government at the time, the British colonial government under the administrator, they recognized that the landless reality of the Grand Bay people, and they floated a proposal to acquire 600 acres of Geneva's 1,400 acres for land settlement. But that proposal was subsequently abandoned due to protests by the prospective tenants, because the Grand Bay people did not want to be tenants anymore. They wanted to be landowners. And they made it very clear to the British colonial government that they're not going to accept to be tenants with the government. So I mentioned that Nassif's eviction was discussed in the UK House of Commons, and the Foreign Office confirmed that notice to leave the estate was given to 211 tenants. The main reason that proposal failed was because of the non-acceptance by the Grand Bay people to be tenants anymore. And you know, in 1953, there were strikes on Geneva and outbursts of violence as retrenchment of labor and systemic running down of the plantation under the Nassifs presented a direct threat to the future livelihood of the residents in the surrounding villages. And the next disturbance in this chronological history of Geneva was 1974. And I'm sure my colleagues, I know that Perez was present during that uprising. Manchild was in England at the time, and Manai was a young student at the time, so they'll be able to give you their insights. But I'll tell you that the Carnival of 1974 is very significant, because that, frankly, is the beginning of the Geneva Uprising. And most people didn't even realize it was beginning. And why did it begin then? The police in Roseau decided to come to Grand Bay for the carnival to stop the Sensei. And I'll tell you, the Grand Bay people reacted very violently. And they threw rocks at the police. The police had to run, I tell you. I've never seen anything like that. And Carnival ended, and soon after Carnival, UNICEF began his revolution. And it was amazing for me as a teacher at the time at the Granby School, which was closed down because once the state of emergency was declared, the Granby School became the base of the Defense Force and the police. And people like me had no work to do, so I was everywhere things were happening. I was there. And I'll tell you something that was really disturbing for me. One of the reasons why there are no photographs of this revolution is because there were only 2 people with cameras then. And do you know that the police they stopped me at the roadblock, and all the footage I had shot, all the film I had shot, they opened my camera, they took what I had already shot. And the only other person, my friend Messiah, his name escapes me right now, but I just call him by his nickname. Everybody know who it is. He had a camera too. They took his camera. So we have no pictures of all of this revolution that happened right before our eyes. It was amazing to me to see kids that I was teaching at the Granby School, 9, 10 years, they were cutting coconut trees. It was a kind of a revolution from below. It was an upsurge from below. The UNICEF was probably leading, but not giving any direction really. People just took things into their own hands, and there were few shops were looted. The Geneva plundered, and we get to the final stage when the estate house was burned down, and that really brings the end of the plantocracy in Granby. So that Sheridan is sort of a nutshell of the context that we were in. And I should mention that when the government declared the state of emergency, it was really to bring Granby back to order. But I will also hasten to say that had not the government supported the Granby people, this could never have happened. I have to say at the time, and this happened at the time when Mr. LeBlanc was in his last months in office. He had already picked, the Labour Party had already picked Patrick John to be the leader, and it was Patrick John who proceeded later on to purchase the estate. By then, Mr. LeBlanc had retired from politics, and the rest is history. The other thing I should mention too is that Granby had become the haven for the dreads of Roseau. So the Granby Revolution also has a Roseau connection to it, which is the Roseau dreads. And I think I could say without contradiction here that I believe it is the Roseau dreads who took action to burn Nassif's store in Roseau that same night when the plantation house burned. So I'll stop here, Mr. G, and so I hope that gives a perspective.
Well, that certainly helps. I mean, we continue to see how colorful the history of Granby is. And what struck me here, just before I go to Perez, what struck me here, Crispin, is that, you see, the Granby people, they showed a lot of courage, a lot of guts. I mean, they knew what they wanted. They refused to be tenants anymore. They said, we want to be landowners. Why can't we be landowners? Why do we have to be tenants? And isn't it nice that they had somebody like Edward Oliver LeBlanc in office who supported the people and said, hey, listen, we got to go along with the people. As you said, Crispin, if the government led by LeBlanc at that time had not supported the people of Granby, the outcome might have been different. And then, of course, Patrick John continued. Perez, I want to come to you because you, like Crispin, you were there. I mean, you saw, you did what needed to be done. You showed the guts of Granby people, and you are somebody who was known in Granby as a leader in many respects, in sports, in all kinds of things. Tell us about your experience in your own words there. And you need to unmute your mic, right?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
I'm hearing you very well.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so good evening to everybody, all the guests, general public, Dominicans at home, abroad. That Geneva thing. It was something. The time was just right for it. It's an idea whose time had come, you know. So there was nothing, no kind of power could stop it, really, you know, because it was like a general rise in consciousness for everybody, the whole village, you know. And Grand Bay having that kind of history, that kind of stigma. Grand Bay come from Guabe, Jean Guabe, you know. All that added to just let the thing rise up and go. But a couple points about the real cause and stuff. It's a lot of things. It's the UNICEF too, but Crispin mentioned about the coconut trees cutting. It actually started. There was a taboo in Geneva. You know, Geneva said you should never cut a coconut tree down. And then one guy, after everything really got hot, he done two of them. You know. So Nasif called the police from town. They came up and they inspected. I remember that afternoon. You know, I wouldn't mention the police name. And then they decided to play hardball. But like Crispin said, the next day it was like hordes of youths with hatchets, and they were just flattening the, you know, because that area where the playing field is now, it was a big lale coco. So guys just started flattening down, flattening down, and then they sent for the police to occupy the village, like the school and everything. And it was like real military occupation, like so to speak. Because I remember once we came from town, Eddie was with us, Eddie, myself, Zairo, and we decided to pass from down by the bay, pass by the schoolyard to go close to our home because it was instead of passing down by the Tupong, you know, Depong. Although we knew the police were there, but we knew it was political stuff and we had nothing to do with that. But they called us in, you know, the defense force guys, and they started questioning us, man. And because they didn't know how to respond to that whole thing. What's the real problem? What is the problem in the village? And I remember Eddie all the time. Man, Nasif is the problem, man. There's no problem in the place. It's just Nasif on the land and then when UNICEF finally, you know, it went on, and then he gave up himself. Like everybody said, the Prime Minister Libla, you know, God bless his soul, that was, you know, real good man. He just kind of put everything in place. He called for a committee of Granby people. Eddie was on the committee too, to come and have talks to settle that whole land issue because it was really becoming unbearable. And I know Geneva well because my father was the manager once. He was manager of Geneva, and I had to bring his lunch for him, you know, in a basket every afternoon and stuff, you know, young boy, and then run back to school, you know, which is not too bad. But I had that privilege because when the guards would run after guys and they would run away just for picking mangoes, for example, I would just stay there and they cannot do me anything. My father is the manager. So I grew up knowing that whole Geneva Grand Bay thing, like Crispin said too. I remember being a very young when people lived in Highland, just across from where we built a house, and when they were sent back, because it stayed in my mind because I was young, about 2 or 3, and troublesome. Small ones, and I ran away. And it flew after me and beat me at the back of my head, and I came crying to my mother and tell her. She told me, "Oh, it's your fault and stuff." And that happened in Highland. In Highland, across the ravine you mentioned. And then a couple years later, by the time I was 5, everything, you know, we all saw it was changed, you know, the village changed. And you can imagine at this time there was no electricity and stuff, you know, whole dark place, you know. So Granby was always a enclave, you know, its own rules, its own everything. And everybody was free to pursue his whatever, you know, everybody was accepted, you know. And today, fast forward into today, I really cannot put my finger on it because I haven't been physically there for a long time. But believe me, I do belong to WhatsApp groups or such, chat. But the main news about Dominica Grand Bay, I'm quite aware of most of the happenings, you know. And it's had to be an activist 8,000 kilometers away. But consciously, I'm still there and still have plans, and I still haven't given up yet. But in conclusion, I will say that today is not like yesterday. Today it's a completely different thing. But we can talk about it later. Yeah.
Yeah, but where you know, Perez?
Mm.
Where are you right now?
I'm in Berlin, Germany.
Yeah, you're in Germany. You see, you're all the way in Germany, and yet you have this great interest in your community, in your
Oh, yeah,
country.
yeah.
You still have this burning desire to help your country to move forward. And there's so many Dominicans who are living abroad, and they still have that same feeling about their country. Dominica is a place that people just love, and Dominicans just love their country. They want to do something, and I do, especially Grand Bay people, they just have the love for their country.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, let me just go over to Manchild. Manchild, you know, one of the things that I think both Crispin and Perez mentioned, two things. You see that coconut tree, that coconut, that's a symbol, right? It was like the symbol of dominance. I mean, Chubby made a song on it, Puyon Coco. I mean, just to pick mangoes. I mean, kids, they were running after kids and so on. And so it seems to me that that estate, in the minds of the young people, it represents, in your case, because your dad, who I knew very well, because he was my godfather. I knew very well because he was a manager of the estate. You felt you could go, but so many other kids just could not go because they'd chase them off. And then we can see what happened with that one coconut. I believe Sui may have had an experience with a coconut as well. I think Sui was he went to jail for about 9 months, if I'm not mistaken, for a coconut on that estate. So Crispin, maybe you can confirm that or not. But I think it was just a coconut. The coconut and the coconut tree was a symbol of dominance of the people, from what I'm gathering. And the other thing that I wanted to do, Manchild, with you, get your personal experience. But when I come back to you, Perez, you'll want to tell us a little bit more about the book, because many people don't know too much about your book that you've written, my dick, or Grandy. So, and then of course, Manchild as well. You also have a book. So we're not, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, listening here on Facebook, or so many of you are with us on Facebook. You have to understand who we're dealing with here tonight. These are some of our intellectuals who helped to fight a revolution in Granby, to bring the people of Granby to what they are today. So these people assisted, they played their part, they had their role to play, and they played their role. And I believe they're looking for the young people to play the role as well, and to continue to struggle to make Granby a better place to live in and to raise a family. So, Manchild, I want to come to you to see if you want to verify any of the things that Crispin and Dr. Andre and Perez put on the table here tonight. And I'm pretty sure that you have your own story, and part of which you have captured in your book about Granby. So if you can unmute your mic, then you can give us your story as we go on. So you need to unmute your mic. So we'll give you a moment to unmute your mic because it's still mute. Okay, go ahead now. No, I think you're still muted. You're still muted, so you need to unmute. Yeah, that's better. Go ahead now.
Yeah. My name is Harrian Manchild Henry. I'm happy to be part of the panelists tonight. And the topic is very interesting to us from Granby especially, because it's going to tell us about our history. As we know, history is one of the factors that form a culture, the historical factor of a man, the psychological, and the linguistics. So history is very much important in a man's life. If I may start, immediately after Nassif acquired of Geneva Estate, a group of Granby residents in early September 1949 decided to march to the government house in Roseau. The purpose was to present to the administration a resolution protesting Nassif's plan to take land that had occupied for a very long time during Lockhart's tenure. A few days after the meeting in Roseau, a group of Granby residents had a public meeting at the Roseau Market, and that public meeting was to also discuss what Nassif's plan was. And a meeting was also scheduled for Grand Bay at the old police station at Tetlale. The main body officials were the finance secretary, acting administrator, and the area's magistrate, and also Nassif. Tension was high and there needed some sort of diffusion. Nassif requested that Grand Bay tenants leave the estate within a few days by the 13th of September 1949. Nassif tried to appease the people by saying that he did not intend to dispossess the residents of their landlords. The residents' main spokesman were Mr. Emmanuel Loblack and Mr. Angelo Winston, who advised them against signing the petition that Nassif had prepared. Lockhart spoke of war between the rich and poor in Dominica. The crowd became hostile to a point that Nassif needed protection to get back to his car. A letter was drawn by Nassif himself, and the letter runs: the crop on the piece of land, part of Geneva estate, formerly rented by me, will be ready for harvesting within months. Please allow me to hold possession till then. I promise to quit your land or before without any compensation. I agree neither to enter the premises nor to take anything which I am not entitled for. In 1950, the people of Grand Bay staged protests, marches, and unsuccessfully petitioned the government for compensation for the estate land which they had leased from the previous owner of Geneva Estate, Mr. Norman Keith Lockhart, for many years. The government decided that the length of tenure was not a case for compensation. The people felt that since Mr. Lockhart had allowed them to occupy the land as sitting tenants, and that Mr. Nassif had no right to evict them. Mr. Nassif continued to experience resentment from the people of Grand Bay, which culminated to the revolution in 1974, and compensation of $975,000 was paid to Nassif for 14,400 acres of land. The population of Grand Bay was growing, and more land was needed for both housing and farming. Mr. R.P. St. Louis, the district representative in 1954, presented two resolutions for the purpose of 200 acres of land from the Geneva estate for the Grand Bay people, and that did not materialize. At a meeting of legislation in 1955, Mr. St. Louis asked Mr. H. Lawrence Lindo, the administrator, whether steps had been taken to acquire the land of Geneva estate for the people of the village. He was told that there were no funds available for that purpose. The workers on Geneva estate went on strike for higher wages some months after the eviction of squatters. The situation of hardship through unemployment had begun. Some of the farmers had to vacate the farmland to make way for Nassif's major plan to use the land for planting coconuts and limes. The new pressures created by Nassif when he bought the estate in 1949 forced the people to devise another system for survival. It took time for another generation to be born out of this new pressure and to react as they did in 1974 uprising. The people said that the estate, which was bought by Mr. Nassif from Mr. Lockhart at Geneva, did not exceed 600 acres of land. But Nassif got Mr. Winsky, the surveyor, to resurvey Geneva estate and stole the people land. He pushed out the occupiers of the land, which they had occupied since emancipation of 1834. It has been said that in free villages such as Mopo, Makaton, Logi, Vieux-Bois, Concoyon, land at Péditan, he took from the people. The people found themselves with no land for the purpose of subsistence farming and had to travel far distances in the hills at Péditan and beyond, as far as Ambaleta, to do the gardening to feed their children. Small-scale cattle farmers found it difficult for their animals to graze, and the only alternative was to tie these cows along the public road on the sides. Mr. Nassif evicted squatters which he met at an area called Highland, who had been there from the time of Mr. Lockhart. Mr. Nassif broke down the homes and put them onto the public road. This action by Mr. Nassif created chaos for some people who had nowhere else to run. In 1956, the 6 last houses were broken down and the people evicted. A man named Noril Henry, the father of Jean, was among those last evicted. Mr. Nassif and his surveyor, Mr. Winsky, went out to a place called Concoyon to evict people there. They met resistance from 3 militant men, namely Apilan Jarvis, Alcindor Joseph, and Ligua Stewart. They met great resistance and that they had no choice but to leave these men alone. Even unto this day, the families of these 3 militant and determined men occupy their respective area at Concoyon. It is true that it was the carnival that really precipitated the revolution, but I'm just going through before I bring you to the actual revolution.
Yeah,
Mr.
but,
Nassif and back on
no, you
Mr.
go ahead.
Nassif and back on Mr. Nassif embarked on planting coconut on his banana estates. He had his own copra factory at Belfast Estate, another estate which he purchased in the 1940s. Mr. Nassif hired watchmen to guard his estate round the clock. These watchmen were described as very wicked by the Granby people. This was because they killed off their livestock by shooting with their rifles, which were given to them by Mr. Nassif. On many occasions, they were forced and faced with someone to appear before magistrate for stealing product on the estate. The case of Chobi Mark of the Midnight Groovers, which resulted in his sentence to prison for 1-year term for stealing 1 dry coconut, made history in 1973. The Midnight Groovers recorded an album entitled Coco Sec, telling the story about the case. The album turned out to be a big hit for the Midnight Groovers. We know that by 1963, the carnival costume sensei was banned in Dominica by the government, but it continued to be inflamed by the Granby people. Carnival Monday, 25th February 1974, police officers intercepted a sensei ban on Block 44, While the police were trying to make the arrest, the people in the band began throwing stones and bottles at the police. Gunshots were heard coming from the band. Meanwhile, 7 people were arrested and taken into custody. It did not take long for the police to come up on a roadblock at Geneva House area to prevent the police from taking the arrested men to Roseau. The police vehicle was damaged at the roadblock. Later that same night, PC Pascal of the police force was struck on the jaw with a stone at a friend's house at Mamouche. He had to be flown to Jamaica for medical attention. The villagers blamed the incident on the police. Another incident on the 25th of February 1974 Carnival was a shooting at a junction of Block 43, where Mrs. Charlie Dangleben resided. PC Parilo was a regular visit to this address. Unknown to him, he was targeted by the Kepassas. Parilo's good friend, a young man named Koshi, also became a target as he was perceived to be an informer. On the 26th of February 1974, Carnival Tuesday, gunshots were fired at the police on Block 44. The policemen were escorting 3 arrested persons, namely Chobi Mark, Lawrence Hewlett, and Drassin Baby, to the police station. The arrests were made on Block 43. Before Drassin was arrested, he was also shot in the head by the police. The police found themselves walking backward to Tetlale, and bottles and stones were fired at them when they got to an area called Block 44. Gunshots were fired at them. During the night, after everything simmered down, the police found some incidents at Block 44 and intercepted and began the investigation on the shooting. PC Richard got information that it was Lambert and Sam who fired the gunshots at the police. Lambert resided in the U.S. Virgin Islands, St. Thomas, but visited his home country regularly. He had already booked his return ticket to St. Thomas for Wednesday, 27th of March 1974. He had also booked his taxi with Maurice Henry, who at the time ran his taxi services from Granby. On his arrival at the Melvin Hall Airport, they met and counted 7 police vehicles, which was unusual. As Lambert was waiting at the check-in counter, one of the officers asked Lambert to follow him to a room at the airport. The officer asked him to wait for a minute while the officer left him there for a minute and so. Upon his return to the room, the police officer at this time was accompanied by a PC Coffee from Granby. Mr. Coffee was asked to identify the person in the room. The police searched Lambert thoroughly and found nothing on his person. Meanwhile, the plane had started and getting ready to take off, but they were forced to wait on Lambert, who was a booked passenger. After a few minutes, he was allowed to leave and board the plane, and the plane left. On the 10th of March of the same year, 1974, the focus was turned to Geneva Estate when a bull which belonged to Mr. Nassif was stolen. Between the 16th and 17th of March, a cow was also stolen from the estate. Then all hell broke loose. Sheep were stolen, coconut trees were hewn down on the estates. On the 25th of March, the dread name UNICEF seized a 5-ton truck, registration number 954, owned by Mr. Nassif, was driven by regular driver Octave Alexander, while the truck was parked in the yard at Geneva House at Campeche. A 10-14 shotgun was also said to have been stolen from the Geneva House. Later that same day, UNICEF was arrested by the police on 6 commitments in default warrant. He was found in possession of a .22 automatic pistol with 1 live round in the magazine, also with a quantity of 1 delignite and 2 detonations. He was taken to the prison at Stock Farm. The same day he escaped from the prison. He was duly charged with intimidation, larceny of a shotgun, theft of a vehicle, being in possession of a pistol without being the holder of a firearms license, and being in possession of explosive and detonation. The case was then pending. The next day, 26th of March, roadblocks from hewn coconut trees from Lale, Geneva, and along the road to the Catholic Church. The burning started on the 27th of March when the Copra House at Geneva Estate was set on fire. Tires, crocus bag, coal, tarpaulin were destroyed. Later that same day, telephone lines between Granby and Roseau were cut out. The grocery shop of James Coffee at Lale was looted, and food valued $860 were taken from the shop. Geneva House was destroyed by fire at 2 a.m. on the 2nd of April 1974. A couple of hours after, the business premises of Mr. Nassif in Roseau went up in flames, leaving only the walls standing. On the 3rd of April 1974, Defense Force was assembled and a state of emergency was declared. Between the 5th and the 12th of April, 10 individuals were arrested and charged with setting fire to the Geneva House. The Geneva Estate Works being in possession of explosive, being in unlawful possession of firearms, and breaking and entering and larceny. On the 2nd of May 1974, the overseer's house was destroyed by fire at 10 p.m. The defense force arrested a man called Tall, found him in the possession of a bag that contained 8 guns, including a Winchester. He was taken to the Stock Farm prison and remained there in the security block for 15 days before he could appear before the courts in Roseau. He was charged for possession of unlicensed firearms. Toll explained to the court that he was on his way home to Back Street when he was stopped by 3 masked men who ordered him to take the bag of guns to a specific mango tree at Mabouche, and he was acquitted when the case called.
All right, man, child, you know something? It's obvious that you have stuff in that book that a lot of people need to read. Because I'm hearing stuff that I never knew about. Maybe Dr. Andre may have known about some of that. Maybe Crispin may have known of some of that, and Perez. But some of what you said there is new information for me, and I would love to read your book. So at some point in time, we have to arrange for me to get a copy of that book. And I hope every person from Granby and Dominica will avail themselves of the opportunity to try to buy a copy of your book so they can read it. And same thing for Perez. But I want to go over to Manai. Before and after Manai Lambi, I just want you to know that we will take a break after that, and Lambi will give out the numbers so that our callers can call us and have their say, as we do every Tuesday on the Global View on Q. Man, you heard a lot, just like what I heard. You've learned a lot. You and I probably, well, not you and I, you're the new kid on the beach, right? So you learned a lot of stuff tonight. I mean, tell us your story of what you learned from all of that and what you have on your own account of, and some
Well,
people who were involved, as you know.
well, I am privileged to be the last person to speak because of my age is your age is superior to mine. And I'm very, very happy to see that you have recognized me as a very young person and you have given me the final slot to express myself on such event.
True.
And all of your guests has referred to the theory aspect of the event, but I'm going to be a little more practical, if you permit me. When UNICEF came from St. Croix, came down, he had what we call a BSA bike. And that during his young days, he was the friend of a guy called Mazli Toza, who is an Angola. And they used to come to our place where we had a cricket field at the back of our mango tree where Radio Bamango's antenna was firstly erected. And he used to call my mother Nen Pole. So from since that time, he was close to myself and my little brother who passed away. May he so rest in peace. And when he came back, I and another schoolmate of mine who is in America now, I would not mention his name, we were associating with UNICEF. None of the events that occurred, people were not aware of the things would have even come into existence. So when the guy and myself followed UNICEF, UNICEF was a skillful guy. He could have dismounted the engine of the bike, reinstall it, and start vroom. He was good in body work. He was a very skillful guy, and he was good in acrobacy. And we went close to the Catholic Church where there was a lady by the name of Mese Harry Peggy. She was a good friend of Mese Toussaint, the mother of Jill Fontaine, who sang the song Vaval Vini Vines Pique Olauteye. And or Dife avant la ligne levée moka descend en ville pour puis corps femme la Dife. Jill was the one who composed and sang this song. So Peggy had a piece of land close to above the church, and she had okras, and UNICEF came to pick, and Peggy come towards me in a kind of an aggressive way, and UNICEF revolted. And I, myself and the other guy, we were there. Time we do catch up, UNICEF took a big cock of hers, in his bag, and we go. And then we went back to Mr. Sheraton's home where he lives, his grandmother's house. And then the guy and myself presumed that was getting too very troublesome for us. So we disassociate ourselves. And on the long couple of weeks after that, he went to Roseau and he got himself in a problem with a vendor for a bottle of wine, if my memory got it right. And he was apprehended by the police, and then he was sent into the prison in town, and he escaped. And he escaped around 4 times from the prison. But people used to say that UNICEF was so skillful that he could fly like a bird. And during the state of the emergency, while they were patrolling down the alley, sometimes he would be under the culvert, he would be next to them. So UNICEF was a guy who was very, very, very talented. But the revolution itself was not something that was pre-organized by a set of people who sat down like the intellectuals. Now, in those days, the intellectuals of our community were regarded to be Perez, Crispin Gregoire, Anthony Laron, Pierre Charles. Those were the secondary school students of those days who were older than I. So they were looked at, but they were uptown babies, as a matter of fact, compared to the guys who were involved in the practical aspect of the revolution. Now, people might not be aware of who really started it. UNICEF was the one who put on the spark, on the plug, but he had a nephew by the name of Edwin, which was the son of the late Maurice Thomas. And he was the one who went and had this guy, Mr. Charles, who was a guard on the estate, and Mr. Baron from Pishne, who was also a guard, and as Manchal spoke about the guy from Dubik, who was Octave. And then they took the guns from them, and then they took the chalk. And from then, other young stars, and I would say the underprivileged stars of the community, the guys who would say that has a minimal level of education, or the guys who were downtrodden, and there were many of them in a large amount of people in that status. And they were the ones who came and started to do things. And there was a place called Basse Ranger. So I went there because they were cooking food there. UNICEF was there cooking food, and guys like Churchill Henderson was a member of the army. But the guy who really did excite everything was his nephew, Edwin Thomas, who died in Guadeloupe, I believe, if my memory is right. He's a little younger than me. And he was the one who started all of this excitement. And then the rebels of the community joined. But UNICEF himself never really took much active part in all of that activity. But there was a guy by the name of Duggan. His name is Eugene Douglas. He was the steering. He was the one giving orders. And then there was Churchill. And there were, I don't want to call all of the names because they might not want their names to be mentioned. So there were so many young people during those days. They were younger than I, but they were the ones who really helped to liberate the estate for the benefit of the underprivileged people in our community. But my own understanding and the way I see it, if it was organized, let us say guys like Crispin, Jockey, and all yourself, Mr. G, would have come and sit down in Granby knowing of that and say, okay, we are going to get the estate. We want the underprivileged people to have land for their homes and for their farms. But the market that Mr. Nassib had in terms of the fiber mattresses, the copra, and all of these things, we could have also take that over and create a cooperative, and that our industry could have continued and play in a part in our development. But everything happens spontaneously. That is what I come to my own conclusion. I came to a couple of years ago when I started to reflect on the matter. Because as I said earlier on, the revolution was not something that where scholars came together and pre-organized a revolution. It was something that happened spontaneously. And I'm just arriving to the end of my propos. If you permit me, I'm so happy to be here in the midst of all of you, and I've learned so much from all of you, like all what Dr. Andre said, Mr. Gregoire, and also Manchild, and I never knew that Perez's father was a Babylon working against the interests of the underprivileged people working for Nazis. So Perez, you benefited from that. If I am not going to create a polemic, I'm just joking, Barry. So what, and even Japheth book there as well. So Barry, I am just saying to you all that I've learned quite a lot from all what you have said, and I know Crispin. I don't know if he can recapture that camera of his, and if he knows where the police and how it is, if he's still at the police station, because I believe that could be of a great asset for history at our secondary and primary schools in Granby and even in Dominica. So thank you. I hope my little contribution worth it.
Yeah, man. Yes. I mean, it really was worth it. I'm going to give Perez, before I go back to Dr. Andre, I want to give Perez a little chance to answer about his dad. You said his dad was a Babylon on the estate. You had to remember that his dad was my power, so you can't go and say anything about Zozio.
I was just cracking a joke. Zozio was
I
No, it's a thing a lot of people didn't know because I myself was young at the time, and he didn't stay in that post for too long, if I remember. He spent about maybe a year or two, but not prolonged manager, because I didn't like it myself. I had to carry his lunch for him in a basket every day. I used to, and my mother said she didn't like the idea. She wasn't too comfortable with it. So he kind of gave it up. But that was in the time when it was not acceptable, but like I said before, the consciousness wasn't as high as when the times when the coconut trees started to get cut, because everybody was kind of seemingly satisfied with that, it was like quasi normal. I talked a lot with guys that worked on the estate, one guy from Jubic Break, that old man, everybody know Break. Mr. used to lecture me, man, he just got peeling the coconuts from the horse, crack, 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 crack. And he used to sit, I used to listen to him for hours, wait till my father finish, I could bring the thing go. And the local people, I learned a lot of things from them. People who work at the copra, Orion, who was my next door neighbor. I don't think anybody lived as close to Orion as myself, Orion was our back door neighbor, and it's a whole story about these people going to boys' school in the old school, the first school, and then the people used to come making tasks. They call it Geneva people, workers. They would be weeding because there was a big stone by the cricket pitch, and from that is Highland. So you can walk on the estate to go home, but you're not supposed to linger there or pick mangoes. That was the rule. So I grew up seeing all that, and at the same time, small growing up, checking it. But is when we grew up and the time was really ripe, because everything fall in place. The UNICEF and the cutting of the coconut and the carnival, everything was just one after the other. So it happened so quick. It's only now we can really sit back and take a good look and hopefully build it back towards that or better,
Yes, thank you for that, Perez. Dr. Andre, you've got a lot. I'm going to ask Lambi in a minute to open the lines. So I'm going to come back to you as soon as Lambi, you can give out the numbers, and as the calls start coming, we'll take them. But if the calls are not coming in yet, I will go to Dr. Andre. But first, give out the numbers and let everybody know that they can make the calls now. We'd love to hear from them, especially from the people of Granby who may know something about what we're talking about.
The numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257, and 305-432-9624. Again, the numbers one more time, 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257, 305-432-9624, and we already have a call on the line. Caller, please go ahead.
Yes, I am here, Lambi.
Go ahead.
Okay.
449-3097. You need to turn down the volume on the device that is close to you.
449. Good evening, Mr. G. Can you hear me?
Yes, but you have something playing in the background, so we can hear the feedback.
Well, I walked away. I know I did walk away.
Okay, excellent. We're hearing you very well, very clear.
Good evening to Mr. G. Good evening to Dr. George Andre. Good evening to your illustrious panel members there, Harrian, one who I know as man-child.
Yes, we are getting.
Hold on, Mr. G. I've got the radio all over and I stepped right into the limelight. Hold on.
Yes.
Is that good?
It's okay.
That's okay. Sorry about that, guys.
Okay.
Man-child. Top of the night to you, man-child. Perez.
Yes, I. Big up.
And also Man-I. I listened to you guys tonight, especially Harry. I'm very interested. He is the historian of the village. There is so much, but I can only take you back the years in the late 60s when the real revolution started, when we carved out a piece of massive property. And I am one person at 12, 13 years old. I resented the people who enslaved our people in Grand Bay. I was one of the guys, the architect, and even though the other guys were older than I was, but was able to convince them to go to the estate, mainly Geneva House. Never knew before you could boil hard-boiled eggs and keep it in the fridge. We would get into the refrigerator in the Geneva House and do whatever we want. Jelly nuts, as you alluded to, Mr. G, that was a good commodity for us even when it was dried. But the point I really want to make is that Grand Bay was a community in the 60s where people, they were proud of their sovereignty. We often spoke about independence, especially when decolonization was packed across the African continent. And I was a revolutionary. I like to think of me as a born revolutionary. And resenting the treatment that Nassif did to our people, someone who would have to work for 14 days or 2 weeks to get $14, $1 a day. Yes, money was plentiful, but that was just pure exploitation of the people. And you heard Harriet talk about the eviction of the people during the 1949 and all that. I can tell you for a fact, before I left, the whole plan was to really drive Nassif out of town. And I am happy in 74 they did. I had already left 5 years earlier, so I am not a part of that. But there is an important thing, Mr. G, I want to share with Grand Bay tonight. And that is they still have the power to control their gains. The revolutionary orchestrated by UNICEF and those called in, they were able to acquire the land. But look what has happened. You've got a tyrant leading the country and took the spoils of the people of Grand Bay, when I believe, and I strongly believe, that everyone in that revolution should acquire a piece of land where they would have their own houses and not a tenement building with faulty septic tank and have the whole place polluted, all of that. Grand Bay people must understand today is the time they need to stand for what they deserve. Their loyalty have been trashed. Everything that they gave to the government gave them nothing in return except mediocrity. Grand Bay people must understand that time is now when they should stand and say, we can provide a leader to represent us. We've been Grand Bay. We are the cultural village of the country. We led in just about everything. We had a prime minister. We had a president. We have had, you name it, Grand Bay has produced it. Dr. Andre is a prime example of product of Dominica. He's not from Grand Bay, but I can tell you he thinks like a Grand Bayan, a revolutionary in his own right. Mr. G, tonight I want to take the opportunity to encourage my people. It is not too late. You have the power, you have the fire in you to tell the leaders to continue to marginalize and exploit you. You get absolutely nothing. Do you have a PS, a permanent secretary from Grand Bay as we speak, Mr. G, that you know of?
Not that I know of, no.
Okay. Now, look what is happening. Grand Bay has given more to the Labour Party besides Portsmouth than any other constituency. Yet still, what do Grand Bay people have? Case in point, I know for a fact, because I was told by a confidant who was part of Kerry's regime, that Roosevelt Kerry never liked Grand Bay people, and it is evident in the killing of our, or the demise of our leaders. Now we know that at the center, which was an agricultural station when I was growing, where the people learned to plant, they learn about agriculture. We were promised, or it was said that they were going to build a technical college, All Saints University, whatever it was. I was told by this confidant that Kerry would never build technical college or university up at the center. Instead, what he gave them, Mr. G, he gave them a police station to incarcerate them. And before anything, the drug squad is up in Granby harassing our people. I won't say too long, time is of the essence. I am glad this opportunity that people can call, express their feelings, and compare what Granby used to be in the 60s, the 70s, and today in the 2020s. Granby is not what? Granby should be the leading constituent, the leading village. It had always been in the country. Today, nothing is happening. We are last Kakarot, and you people in Granby have to stand up and say, get Vince Henderson out. You worse more than that. You cannot allow a man plant someone who was rejected in his own constituency in St. Joseph to come and take you for a ride. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm with you. I'll support you, but you must learn to help yourself to stand for your rights. Thank you very much, Mr. G, and I do appreciate the opportunity to express myself.
Well, and thank you so much for your comments here tonight. I suspect that Perez and Lambi, we can take another call. Yes, you can go ahead. I just suspect that Perez and Manchild might have recognized that voice. All right, Lambi, go right ahead.
Caller, please go ahead.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Good
I'm
evening.
happy to listen to that conversation tonight. Like that book this gentleman was reading there tonight,
Manchild.
it should be made available to the schools in Granby, from the primary to the secondary, because a lot of the young children maybe doesn't know nothing. People in their 40s and maybe even 50s doesn't know anything about what really took place in Granby, that they could be enjoying the kind of privilege they have up there today. And a question I would like to ask, Mr. Nassif was a foreigner. How did he happen to acquire all that property? I didn't hear that I didn't maybe pick that up from the people that were reading before me. How did he happen to acquire all that property up there and have people like on a plantation for him working like slaves? I would really like to know, how did he acquire all that property? Please, because what I hear in there and what's going on in Granby today, it's too different, because it's a time like now, with that government we have there, they should say, thank God for Mr. Libla. Because if it was a time like now, Starboy stupidity would never give the Granby people that opportunity to get that land away from the owner that had it. No way. Just see what the people of Wesley and other villages facing. Granby people say thank you to Mr. Oliver Libla, and all you have scared like a god. Scared is not a god. Now all you maybe should know what all you have to do. Put things in the right places and get people like Vince out of Granby. Because Skerrit installed Vince there just for his own personal, I don't know, whatever. But get Vince out of Granby and install people that from Granby in Granby. Good night.
Good night, and thank you so much, Lambi. I think that question, I'm pretty sure that, yeah, you can take the call, Lambi. That question, I think Dr. Andrew will answer when he comes up. Go ahead, Lambi.
Yes, caller, please go ahead.
Yes, good night to all the panelists.
Good night.
I'm very happy to be there listening to this program tonight. Most of the panelists are from Granby. I know them very well. They are very familiar. Now, the next thing I want to say, I heard the name Suey Grell been mentioned very much tonight. So I had to call to let you all know that Suey Grell, his name is Anthony Grell, better known as Suey.
Right.
Suey is the only man who was sent to 1 year in jail and spent only one night in jail. He did not have a haircut. He didn't get a change of clothing. The same way he went to jail for one coconut, he came out tomorrow morning with the same clothes he had on. And this is history. No other person have been sentenced to jail for 1 year and spent one night in jail. And he didn't get a haircut, and he was not given the prison uniform. So you have to think of that. as to why that happened. The government had passed this law called the Predial and Larceny Act, that anybody who would take a coconut, sugarcane, a guava, a lime, or an orange, and the owner would report you to the police, there was no other penalty except 1 year jail for a coconut. And Suey Grell in those days was a revolutionary. He used to wear some kind of shirts made from the flower bags, and he used to wear all kind of slogans on the shirt like Cuba, Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, Land for the Landless, No CIA, and he was a walking revolutionary poster. Every day that was his uniform. And he was an activist in the village. So he was a member of a youth group in Grand Bay called Pilier. And that youth group in Grand Bay called Pilier decided that it was going to challenge that law that was sending people to 1 year jail for a coconut. So we volunteered, Anthony Grell volunteered to challenge the law. He decided he's going to sacrifice himself. So he went down to the Geneva estate where the manager was. That manager name was Howell Warrington. And in front of Warrington, Suey Grell took a coconut, he peeled it, he broke it open, and he ate it. And Anthony Grell and Mr. Warrington told the employees, you see that? You see Mr. Grell just steal a coconut in front of me? So he called the police. He made a report. The police charged Anthony Grell with theft of a coconut. And the day in court, when Suey had to appear in court, on that day, the police came out with a contingent of armed police in a 3-ton truck, all of them armed with 303 rifles. But what happened the night before the court date, there was a big political meeting in Grand Bay held by the same youth group, Pilier. And it was said that Anthony Grell cannot go to jail. If he goes to jail tomorrow, he will come out the same day or the next day. So the police thought, well, this was going to be some riot to prevent Suey from going to jail. So they came up well armed the next day, surrounded the court, well armed to prevent anything from happening. But that was not the plan of the youth group. The plan of the group was to appeal the case, because at that time, lawyer Brian Allen was very friendly to the revolutionary movement in Dominica. So Brian Allen was taken as the lawyer for Anthony Grell. And when the case was heard, the magistrate was Angelo Winston. He told Anthony Grell, well, your government passed a law saying that if you take a coconut, it's 1 year jail. Then the police who was there right away grabbed Anthony Grell to lead him to the cells for when he's ready to be taken to Her Majesty's prison. Anthony Grell brushed his hand and told the magistrate, Mr. Magistrate, no, he said, your worship warned this officer. So the sergeant said, well, Mr. Magistrate, or your worship, you only read the law to Grell, but you have not sentenced him yet. So the magistrate repeated and said, well, it's not me, it's the law. It's 1 year jail for a coconut. The police attempted to grab Grell again, and Grell brushed his hand. Then the inspector of police said, but Mr. Magistrate, you see, you just reading to him, but you have not sentenced him. So Mr. Angelo Winston, the magistrate, said, okay, Anthony Grell, you are sentenced to 1 year jail hard labor. Then the police took Anthony Grell and went with him to the cell so he can be transported to the Her Majesty's prison. So Grell did not resent. He went right there before the magistrate sentenced him. No, before the police let him out of the police station, he said, I appeal. The magistrate said, okay, if you appeal, you'll have to go to your lawyer. He will prepare all the paperwork for the appeal and bring it for me. I will sign it and we'll take it from there. So Suey was taken to the prison for the night. And to tell you the truth, I was the man that was on his side like his bodyguard. The same day, we went to Brian Allen and all what was supposed to be done to get the papers ready for the magistrate to sign. But when we got all the information ready from the attorney, Brian Allen, it was too late. So we had to wait the next morning early to go to Mr. Angelo Winston's home at Goodwill. We arrived there before 6 in the morning, and to tell you the truth, Mr. Angelo Winston was already outside waiting for the police to come for him to go wherever he was going to have calling his case on that day. When he saw us arrive, when we handed him the envelope for the appeal papers, he was trembling like a leaf. He took it, he signed it, he gave it back to us. We went up to the prison and we told the prison guard we come for Anthony Grell. He said, what? Are you come for Anthony Grell? We said, yes, we come for Anthony Grell. We come for him. He cannot stay there. Now, he thought, well, he saw us like you were threatening to take Grell by force. Then when we saw how he was acting, then we just gave him the envelope and said, well, this is what the magistrate sent for you. He read it and he said, okay, no problem. He went for Grell and said, Anthony Grell, you are leaving. Anthony Grell said, leaving to go where? I cannot leave the jail. I've started to do my work inside there, convincing and educating the people who are in jail. The chief warder said, but you've got to go. You cannot stay there. We don't want a man like you inside the jail. So we left with Anthony Grell. He still had the same clothes, no haircut, and he told us, man, why did you all come and get me from prison? I'm already there doing my job. I'm educating the prisoners. You should have left me there. It's my job I'm doing. Because of that appeal, there were 35 people in jail facing 1 year jail for a coconut during that time, including the mighty Chobi, who also took a coconut on the estate, and he was sent to jail. When the appeal court heard the case, they realized that this law was an inhuman law to sentence people to 1 year jail for a lime or a guava or a coconut. They said this law is inhuman, and Patrick John at that time had nothing else that he could do but to abolish the law, and all 35 people who were in prison were freed. So some of them had already had 3 or 5 months in prison. So when they're talking about the history of Granby, Anthony Grell is a man who has been forgotten. They have written books about Granby. Never once do they remember Anthony Grell to mention him. I look at him as a hero because he's the one who freed the people who were in jail for 1 year. So UNICEF now also did a good job, but what people don't know, UNICEF always had a grudge against Nassif. Because when he was still a schoolboy, he saw Nassif breaking down his mother's house on the Geneva estate at Highland. And that burned his heart. And he always used to say, one day he's going to take revenge against Nassif. And without anything, he was in St. Thomas with his wife and children. Something just came to his mind and told him, well, now is the time to go and remove Nassif from Geneva. He just left St. Thomas, he went to Dominica, and he started the revolution. His wife is still alive in St. Thomas. And I, for people who recognize my voice or know who I am, I'm Paul Alexander, and I also wrote a book about Geneva, and the title of the book is called From Bala to UNICEF. So when the revolution was on, I was a school teacher, and the people who were taking part in the revolution used to bring, when they heard police was coming, some of them would come to the school, pass through the back window where my class was, and let me hold either a gun or a machete or a hatchet for them, and then they would come for it another time. So it's a lot to be said, but I realize I cannot be there taking the whole time. But I just wanted to mention Anthony Grell, who is still alive, and he has to be recognized as a hero. And this year they were planning a Granby reunion where it marks 50 years of the Geneva Revolution, 50 years of cultural group Tradibel, 50 years of the village council. But I don't know what happened. Something fell along the way, and people like Grell and all the Geneva revolutionaries had to be honored. But I guess planning was not put together properly, and I guess this will not happen as was planned. I think they will have to put that for next year because the date that was planned for the reunion is almost on us, and we don't see anything concrete as to these things are going to happen. So anyway, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to express my views on the Granby Revolution, which is now 50 years this year. Thank you.
Paul, I just wanted to say thanks to you. I mean, at least you give your name and you indicated what the part you played in all of this. I think we're very happy to have had your contribution here tonight. And I believe we heard a voice before. It also was a Granby man talking about his contribution. And I believe we'll hear other voices from Granby to talk about their contribution to the revolution. Lamb, you have another call?
Yes, the calls, the many calls are on there. Good evening, caller. Please go ahead.
Good evening, Lambi, and good evening to the panel.
Good evening.
Yes. Gentlemen, I want to look at another aspect of Nassif and Granby, you know. Mr. Nassif, as they said, he bought the estate in 49, and he has never been really nice to the Granby people. Because I had the experience. At that time, I worked at the center, the agricultural center, as a pupil, right, in agriculture. And Mr. Nassif, at that same time, the Canadian government decided to give Granby the primary school we have now, because before that, you had the Granby Girls' School and the Granby Boys' School. So when Canada decided to give a school, they were giving a school so that both boys and girls would attend the school. So they needed 10 acres of land then to build the school. And Highland was identified to get that 10 acres of land. When Mr. Nassif was approached, Mr. Nassif said in those days, and I'm telling you, I got it from reliable source. It's nothing like just hearsay. Mr. Nassif at the time said he's not donating the land, he's not selling the land, he's not leasing the land, he's not renting. What he wants is an exchange. If you are taking 10 acres from him from Highland, you want 10 acres from government land. And Mr. LeBlanc at the time had no choice but to give Mr. Nassif 10 acres of land from the agricultural station. Right? So if Mr. Nassif was a man who was at least genuine, you could have donated the land, and maybe all know the Granby Primary School would be called Elias Primary School. So this man, Granby people had the right to run him away out of Granby because he did too much wickedness to Granby people. Good evening, gentlemen.
And good evening, and thank you so much for calling. Lambi, if you have another call.
Good evening, caller. Please go ahead.
Hello. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, good evening.
Good night to the panel. And I just want to congratulate the organizers of this program for making a very important contribution to filling some of the vital historical gaps in Dominica's development history. There's some gaps that I myself would like to help fill, and I'll try to do that quickly to allow for many others, as many possible, to call. The Granby event didn't start in 1974. As many of the contributors have said, it started long before. But in 1972, something happened on another estate in Dominica, which triggered events not just in Granby, but throughout the island, and I dare say throughout the Caribbean. In 1972, some of you may recall, the workers of the Casa Bruce estate took the estate from CDC. CDC was an international corporation that owned two big estates in Dominica, one at Melville Hall and one at Castle Bruce. There is an important element of that estate takeover in Castle Bruce that is vital to understanding what happened in Grand Bay. Most of you will not know, but it took 18 months of organizing from January, February 1972 to January, February 1974 to convert the passion of the people of Dominica who needed ownership and control over land in order to chart their own future, to convert that passion into a plan. There are two documents I just mentioned, which most of you probably don't know about. Maybe Crispin does. One of them is a document called Development Through the Transformation of Agriculture, which took a look at Melville Hall Estate and Castle Bruce Estate, did a detailed analysis of the estates and their land use, and made proposals as to how a change in the use of the land of these estates would result in the economic liberation of the people involved, heretofore only as workers. I also draw your attention to another document that was produced in 1972-73 called A Chance for a Change. The late Rosie Douglas assisted in the production of that report. That report became a financial grant-seeking proposal which went to international agencies in 1972 and 73 that resulted in international financial support coming in for land reform from the bottom up, from the grassroots in Dominica. That's another report that exists. And here's the Granby link. During the 18 months between 1972 and 1974, several persons from Granby who were involved in addressing the land issue at Geneva used to come and spend time with us in our study groups in Castle Bruce, which were held every day. And these young men, and there were some young women too, came and spent time listening, talking, understanding that it is one thing to take over land, but it's quite another matter to organize the proper use of that land so you don't have a setback and a return to the way things were. So that infusion of a thinking and a planning approach to the revolution took place. In that same period of time, 1972, 73, 74, another very important development occurred that was critical for Granby, and Crispin would be able to comment on that. The Movement for a New Dominica, MND, was formed and became a place where those kinds of planning and preparations for revolution were taking place throughout the island, all over the country. Pierre Charles, Rosie, etc., etc. So these are some important gaps in the narrative that I've heard so far this evening that need to be bridged. Other than that, the next generation of Granbarians will make the same mistakes. Will take the land, but because they would not have given much thought to how they were going to use that land, it may end up being what we have today, a reversion. I just heard Paul call. Paul was a revolutionary in the day, but Paul became a reactionary because Paul aligned himself with the very thinking and policies that were actually the thinking and policies that Granby fought against. And there are several like that. And that always happens. There's always people who slide. So I just want to suggest then that in revisiting and documenting, and I think Paul and everyone should be called back together, and there should be a sit down, just as there's another event in 74, held in Granby that nobody yet has mentioned. There was a conference of the Caribbean Association of Economists, the Caribbean Association of Agricultural Economists. That conference was held in Granby to look at what needed to be done so that land occupation and land takeovers, which was happening throughout the region at the time, didn't just become land takeovers and they would revert, but actually became the platform from which a whole new Dominica, a whole new Caribbean, which was owned and managed by the workers, like the workers of the Geneva estate. That was the idea. That took place in Grand Bay. And many Grand Bay people participated in that discussion. There is a report at UWI on that very important historic meeting. So in other words, there is documentation that kind of fills in the gap that suggests that what happened in Granby in 1974 was actually the growing evidence of a culmination of efforts by other Dominican and Caribbean people who had committed already their lives to transforming Dominica in much the same way that UNICEF and all the others committed their lives to transforming Grand Bay as a microcosm of the development challenge that we all confronted then.
All right.
I want to more of your time just to suggest the gaps that have to be filled. Thank you so much.
I want you to know that we appreciated that giving us that information to fill that gap. Really appreciate it. Lambi, but I know Lambi has some other calls waiting. Lambi, let's go right ahead.
Yes. Good evening, caller. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good evening, Lambi and the panel. Thanks for taking my call. Me, first of all, trying to support some panel for this historical, moment this evening. Very timely and needed. I think in many ways we've come to a similar point on that same circle at this juncture in our history, where the indigenous people are again being taken for granted by official circles and the ruling class. Where, to me, in many ways, it may not be land, it may not be those things, but the process of governance in the country is at that same juncture again, where the people are going to have to take control of their future and do something for changing and bringing back more rights, official rights to indigenous people in the country. So I think I'm happy that we can talk about this tonight. I think there's a lot to learn from it, but it's the time again where we're going to need some brothers standing up and some sisters standing up and doing the right thing for us to bring this country back to a sense of justice, especially for the indigenous people. Thanks a lot for this program, brother.
And then thanks a lot for your contribution as well. I mean, really appreciate that. I mean, so much is coming out of the discussions tonight, Lambi. If you have another call, you'll just make me a high sign, and I will take it. Dr. Andre, let me get back to you. I've tried to get back to you for some time, but you can see the calls have been coming in. There's so much that so many people know, and they want to share with us tonight. And I think it's very important for them to share that information with the younger generation who really don't know much about this and the role that their forebears have played in the liberation, not only of Granby, but in many other communities, all these estates were situated. So, Dr. Andre, your comments. First of all, I mean, somebody asked a question about the ownership of how did the Nassif come to the ownership of the estate. You can spend a little time on that, but there's so much has happened with all the contribution, and I'm sure there's a lot more that you want to add to all of this.
Well, the ownership by the Nassifs, the Lockhart family were having some difficulty. Norman, who was known as a benevolent despot, to be quite honest with you, in the sense that he owned the estate, well, his family did for generations. He had an estate to run, and he also had revenues to generate, and that was being generated through the arrangements with the local Granbarians. And Nassif came, and the Nassifs came into Dominica in the early 1930s. He's one of the few persons of Lebanese vintage who came with money. He didn't come directly from Lebanon. He came through, I believe, Suriname. And he was very industrious. In the 40s, he started agro-processing, along with the likes of the late Leo Monigod, Emmanuel, and others. And he moved from one thing, and his whole vision for Geneva was to provide the raw materials to launch that industry, that factory that he did, processing soaps or making soaps with coconut products. So to that extent, that was the justification for purchasing Geneva. I appreciate what Athia said. Obviously, the whole question as to the intellectual context in which the revolution happened in 74. But I think Crispin's point, and I agree with him, to be honest with you, corroborated by the other contributions from Manchild and Perez, is that this was a roots up. The fact of the matter is that this took place in Granby for particularly local reasons. Let's face it, Portsmouth, the main estate in Portsmouth was a sugarloaf, even bigger than Geneva, with just as many coconut trees. Why did it not happen in Portsmouth as opposed to Granby? So you must look at the local conditions in Granby to understand more fully what happened in Granby. Now, let me say, as an aside, I certainly hope that Manchild and Perez can give us some information where they can get, where people like myself can obtain their books. I certainly would love to get a copy of it. And perhaps if it's not on the market, as it were, perhaps Mr. G, if you could get their respective telephone numbers, who knows, I may be in Dominica sooner than later. I would certainly, to the extent that Manchild is in Dominica, and I know Perez is in Germany. I don't speak German, but to the extent that I can reach out to them and acquire a copy of the book, I certainly have a very great interest in looking at these local histories, because that is what we should be focused on. Local histories, not only of communities, but certain individuals who have made a contribution significantly to the development of Dominica. And in doing so, we are revising the very nature and complexion of history, because history is not just a narration of events. History is basically a story of the contributions made by persons who are otherwise overlooked, persons who are not intellectuals, persons who don't speak with a fine accent or with big words like you, Mr. G, but persons who, through their lived experiences and their lived realities, reacted in a certain fashion to certain stimuli. And Granby is a wonderful case, in my view, that we should gain as much knowledge. Certainly, I believe that, as possible regarding what happened in the 70s, why it happened, what were the conditions, what were the persons involved, and so on and so forth. And even Paul, what's his last name? One of your callers.
Paul Alexander.
Paul Alexander. I don't know where he is politically as we speak, but certainly I would like to know a little more about Grell, and I will certainly be further in my research on that, because it might be important to a piece I've written, I've published online, an academic electronic journal, and I'm actually in the process of expanding it. So I think all these stories are very important, and I'm happy that Crispin, Manchild, Man 1, I should call myself Man 2 for God's sakes, Perez. I am very pleased at what I've heard from them. Education is a continuous thing. It doesn't end with university or high school or whatever, it continues. And as I said, I certainly look forward to engaging these folk by first starting by reading the books that they've done. And I certainly hope that they can indicate in some fashion or the other how I can lay my hand on both of these works. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Andrew. Well, it looks like we have a little bit of work to do here, Perez and Manchild. So I will contact you tomorrow, and we'll see how we can get your book out there. Because what's going to happen tonight, based on the discussions we've had here tonight that have been so substantial and deep and interesting and far-reaching, and it talks really about the roots of what is happening in Granby, and it really has a lot of lessons for new generations coming up as where they should go from here as far as their lives are concerned in Granby. So certainly I would like to get together with you tomorrow. We'll talk to see how we can get your books out there. Some people want to buy them. And then, of course, Paul, if you're still listening, we have to try to get together, because I think it will be useful when I listen to what you have to say about Sui. He's a man I know very well. It means that we need to get the rest of that story so it can be fully written, because he did play a major role. I mean, when you talk about a man trying to say, let me stay in jail to educate people, that has to be something there. It's inside of that guy. So, Paul, if you're listening, we ought to try to get together so we can get Dr. Andre to write some more of that, and not only the role that Sui played, but the role that you may have played yourself in being at his side and helping him to ensure that he got to the magistrate to get that get out of jail card. So it seems to me that there's some work to do, and I'm very happy that I was here tonight on this program to share in all that information. And it's very rich information, and rich in the culture and history of Granby. And I really wish that the young people of Granby would get a sense of their value, their self-worth, because their forebears have done all this for them. If it had not been for those people, what would have happened? I mean, people who live at Highland and all over the place, they probably wouldn't have had those lands. I mean, when you listen to somebody saying that Nasib did not want to give the 2 acres, donate it. He had a bill. It's the land. He could have donated it, but he said, no, I want an exchange. Give me another piece somewhere else. But so it just goes to show why the people were a little bit incensed. I mean, even if you were an estate owner, you could have been generous, and maybe the people might have been a little bit more gracious to you. But it seems to me that gives us an example of what may have been the situation at the time. So the people just were not too happy about Nasif and the estate. And when you really think about it, you know, Crispin, when you really think about it, to put a man in jail for one coconut, I mean, that is unconscionable.
Yeah. No, that was a huge travesty and injustice. But I wanted, before we end, just to say that what happened after the state of emergency ended, because we went into another era. I think Afi mentioned a little bit about it when he talked about the Granby people coming to Castlebrooks. I was actually one of those who went to Castlebrooks to learn, because what happened, Manai in his presentation said that the intellectuals were not really involved in the Geneva Uprising. They were involved, but not on the front line. But what happens after it ends, we now realize that there's a huge vacuum to be filled, and we better start working towards filling it. And the first thing that happened was the emergence of the group called Lechelle, which I was part of. I myself and Norrin John came up with the idea the late Norrin John, who was a great mind. We decided we should form an organization, we should form a group, and we should be upfront very early and say we are political. And within months of that group being established, other groups start to emerge, like Paul Alexander mentioned PLA, the group he was affiliated with. We had a group called FUSH. We had the group Sovereign Liberated Dancers. Later, the Sovereign Women's Organization for Rural Development, SWORD. And all of this, granted, after Geneva was settled and the landlord had to run for his life, everybody was now immersed in work and study. That was now the watchword. And people were studying in the library that was established by Pierre Charles. And the organization, Lechelle, he became the leader. At that point, people like myself and Anthony Larond and Norrin John and Jacqueline Lita, we had gone over to different parts of the world to study, and Pierre Charles emerged as the political figure, and he built an organization that to this day has continuing impact. Although some people have tried to not recognize his efforts, but he's been a champion. I would say after UNICEF, Pierre Charles is the next hero of Granby, and I'm hoping. And Pierre Charles, he came from humble backgrounds, and he was determined to make a difference, and he did. I mean, imagine a man who's focused on teaching people to read who couldn't read, and working as a farmer. He really embodied the direction that we wanted to take Granby. Of course, a lot of political developments, things did not always go the way it should. But I would say that the thing for the young Granby people to emulate is you have to be organized. You have to organize yourselves. You have to be in an organization. And that's what Granby is lacking right now. I feel that experience we had after Geneva was taken we began to organize, recognizing that it was the spontaneous upsurge from below that really brought the revolution. Now we tried to organize it. I would say one of the things that inhibited the development of the people's movement was migration. Many of us migrated, and that created a vacuum that up to this day has not been filled. And I don't know if it will ever be filled, but here am I. I mean, I'm in my late 60s now, and I've been involved in that struggle in Granby from the time I was 15 years, and I guess all my colleagues were also similarly involved. But it's been a tremendous road to have traveled, and I'll tell you that experience of the Geneva Uprising actually has shaped my life. I have not seen any other revolution. That's the only one I've seen, and I'll tell you, I'm still connected to it. So I just want to sensitize the young people of Granby that they can take the bull by the horn. They can rise up. And Sheridan asked early, is the soul of Granby gone? I would say no. The soul of Granby can never go anywhere, but it needs to be rejuvenated. It needs to be reawakened. And that is the task that the young people have to undertake. Thank you.
Yes, I figure that's a task that all of us have to help the young people to undertake as well. Crispin will come back to you for closing remarks because we're coming to that time. But I want to go to Manai for his final word and his closing remark, because you can see the time has already overtaken us. We're actually on overtime now. Manai, your final remarks, and I will be going to everybody for the closing remarks.
Okay, Mr. G. I just want to recognize the statement that my school teacher, Crispin Gregoire, mentioned earlier on about Pierre Charles. You know, Pierre Charles' siblings, most of them migrated to North America. He could have left Dominica with the possibility of having a green card, and yet still he stayed in Granby, not winning. He started to win when he joined the Labour Party in the coalition government in 2000. That's when he became a member of government. So he was, as power rep, he used to receive a little $1,200, $300. So leaving his school as a school teacher, he taught me at school as well, both he and Crispin. And this man stayed there until he became prime minister. Although my political principle was not that of theirs, but there is something I believe we have to give Jack his jacket and coat his coat. Pierre Charles was and is one of our heroes, and I do support Mr. Gregoire 100% on that observation. And I think Pierre Charles people need to be more like in the days of Pierre Charles when he mobilized the whole community. For example, when Pierre Charles, Rosie Douglas, these guys, and even Crispin himself, they started to create work and study or bring history to people. At that time, they were closer to the leftist type of political ideology. I discovered the two German philosophers who came from Germany and met in the cafe in Paris, and who wrote the thèse for the communist philosophy, which was Marx and Engels. And then the Lenin and them, who made the revolution overthrow the Tsars and them, took over, and they came up with the principle. But Stalin, probably after the Second World War, went over and giving power to one man too long for sometimes have them going upside down. So when I recall those days, in the days of Pierre Charles and Crispin and my brother Charles Engelben, they were all, and many other young stars in the community. We had a tendency of all being leftist. Also, there was something, because what was surrounding us, especially from the intellectual, like I recall if Crispin was that left. But if he is called Raspu has to do with Rasputin, the advisor of the Tsars. So probably he was on that side as well. So what I'm saying, the influence that most of us, like for the independence of Dominica, people of my age group, I was extremely young, we were all mobilized to support that move. You understand? No, I'm living in Guadeloupe. And I'm asking myself a question, if at that age, would I have to really be a person for independence actually from Great Britain? Why couldn't I demand Great Britain to enable us to get the reparation by making us a department of British, like the Guadeloupe and people who are benefiting in education, in health, in social, in everything that we might want to think about, instead of we ourselves managing our affairs and we are unable to treat each other correctly. Sometimes I say that like that, I might not be influenced, I might not be pleasing a lot of revolutionary people on the outside, but I am just a little balanced because I am living here in Guadeloupe, and I can tell you there are many people who are intellectuals in Guadeloupe who are fighting for the independence of Guadeloupe. But I am asking myself, and most of the young people are also rallied behind them, but they do not have the experience that I have had. Although British was not giving us any privileges like France is giving them today, but the statute had to change in 1946 when they became Department of France, but they were similar to us when we were British subject. So I just want to come to a conclusion here now to end my final remarks. Mr. G, thank you so much for inviting me on such a program by being in the mix of people I cannot walk in their shoes. People like Perez, Manchild, Crispin, and Dr. Andre, which of course I like to hear his articulation. It's musical when he speaks. Yourself, you speak more like, your voice is sounding more like Bill Gates. So I'm impressed with all the voices.
Man, you shouldn't let Dr. Andrea you say that, you know.
So I'm just kidding.
I'll never hear the end of that.
I'm a guy with a high sense of humor, you know. So now and then I try to just. Perez's mother used to say to us when we were on our way to school, in between there must be a joke. And she was the one who cut my navel. And if you see that navel, all women would see it. They say, boy, you have a sexy cut. So Perez, big up to your mother. And Perry himself, I will tell you before I go, how Perry played a great role during his group, the Radio of Black Machine, and the late great Jamala. Jamala also taught me at school. And what I can recall with Perez, when his musical instruments were downstairs his mother's building, each and every young people that would want to come and learn, they would play guitar, go on organ, drums, and they would not run away. They would not shun them from doing that. And many of these young guys have become musicians, singers, drummers, and it's because of Perez's way of communicating. So the type of culture that we had, or the behavior, the tradition that we had in the days of Perez, since the non-traditional commerce has taken over, this has also contributed towards the change of unity. And apart from that, the politics itself has arrived at a level that is also conducive towards that the degradation, or in terms of bringing down the spirit of togetherness. I don't want to hold any party responsible, but since I came back to Dominica to try to do my little radio station. I was the first person to open a radio station, private radio station on the island. It was not easy for me in my community, but it's not even in Dominica. But I want to say that if the days of Perez and Crispin and Pierre Charles can return into existence, I believe we will have a Granby where we don't need a man from outside of Granby to represent us as a parliamentary representative. We have enough intellectuals that can do the job, and I believe I have no kind of grievance against political parties, but I believe it is kind of a disrespectful for the amount of clever and young intellectuals we have, for somebody outside of a community who once represented his own constituency to be our parent. So it's like disrespecting Pierre Charles. That is that to me, and I believe that should change, and we all have to speak it like that. And this is one of my personal point of view on that subject that you tried to approach earlier on, but because of the length of the duration of the program, we couldn't expand to that. So I just want to say to you, thank you so much for inviting me in that program.
Yes, and thank you so much for your contribution, and I know that your contribution will continue in Grand Bay. I wish you all the best for your radio station. As I go over to Manchild, and Manchild, you can unmute your mic in the meantime. I just wanted to, as I do that, as I transition to Manchild, I wanted to recognize some of the comments that were made about Pierre Charles. And I wanted to send a message out to Pierre Charles' son. I believe he is the chairman of the Grand Bay Village Council at the moment. My understanding is that he is interested in promoting his dad's legacy. And I think that is something that the Grand Bay Village Council should really take up. I think it's important to Grand Bay for history to record the work of people like UNICEF and like Perez and like Manchild and like Pierre Charles. But I mean, you see, it's very important for the Grand Bay Society, for Dominica to record these people's work in very living colors, because it's great works, right? And we have to notice greatness. We cannot just look for somebody else to come from outside to tell us. We have to recognize greatness when we see it. So I just wanted to say that I would prepare to do anything to assist Mr. Pierre Charles' son. No, I think he may be still the chairman of the village council. If he really is interested in promoting his dad's legacy, which I think is a really noble thing for him to do, I believe he should get every assistance possible, and every one of us in Dominica should be very happy to assist him and his village council in doing that. And as a matter of fact, I think the government of Dominica should be very grateful for Pierre Charles' contribution and should really make every effort, not only himself, but Rosie Douglas as well. But certainly, I think Pierre Charles, that's why we're talking Grand Bay tonight. And I'm very interested in what is happening for Grand Bay. I really wish that we could get a lot more recognition for Pierre Charles. I mean, we don't even hear of his name being mentioned on the anniversary of his birth or his death or whatever. We really need to appreciate our own. Manchild, as I switch to you, you can unmute your mic. I think you're definitely going to have to do something so that we can get your book out there, because it looks like people are in. Somebody mentioned that your book and Perez's book should be available to all the schools in Dominica. And I totally agree with that. And so, but anyway, Dr. Andre is interested in getting a copy. I'm interested in getting a copy. I'll be happy to buy a copy. So we'll talk tomorrow so that we will see both yourself and Perez. We'll see how we can get those books going. Manchild, I think your mic is muted. So you might want to unmute your mic now so that you can give us your closing remarks. So I'll give you a minute to open your mic. Please do that. Unmute. You're still muted. So you need to unmute your mic. If you can't do it now, okay, very good. Looks like you're unmuted now. No, you're right. Go right ahead now. Go right ahead.
Just for information, we spoke of Geneva. The word Geneva, how it came about. After Anton Lavalette, the Jesuit priest, the estate was confiscated from him in 1763 by the tribunal in France because it was prohibited for church factions to involve in slavery. So the estate was sold to one Robert Bertrand from Switzerland, and he was stationed at Bascade at the entrance to Dubic because the store was a fort, and he bought the estate in 1763 from the tribunal in France. And to remind him of where he came from, he named the estate Geneva, forgetting the name Colebrook Bay. So he's he who called the estate Geneva.
Excellent.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Yeah.
So as we said, Manchild, I will contact you tomorrow.
And my book, If you Google Manchild, Harry and Henry, all information will come up.
Right, Marian. Okay.
About the book. Yeah.
Well, because I'm still getting text messages on my phone, people saying that they too want a copy of the book. So we have to find a way so they can get a copy. All right. Now, as I slide over to Perez, I just wanted to assure our audience, and I'm sorry that we didn't get much time to acknowledge all these folks who are still with us on Facebook and on YouTube and on other platforms. I want to let you know that we embrace you, we cherish you, we value your presence here, value your comments. We did not get time to really read some of your comments, but we want to acknowledge the comments that you'll be making and the fact that you've stayed with us. And most people, I find the comments from them is that it's a very educational program. They really never knew that much about the rich history of Grand Bay. And I'm hoping that we can see a lot more of that stuff coming. So tomorrow, I know that the Electoral Reform Coalition is going to have maybe a 2-hour program on Q95 between 1 and 3. They're going to be promoting the gathering, which is supposed to take place in Granby on Sunday. I'm hoping that they will take the opportunity, because they're going to Granby, I'm hoping that they were listening to this program tonight, and I would like them to take the opportunity to speak a little bit more of Granby. I do not want the conversation to end. I think we're going to have to keep the conversation going, to keep Granby on people's mind, so that people will know the kind of contribution that Granby has made. So I'm reaching out to people like Mackenzie and Boston and all the people who are involved in the Electoral Reform Coalition. Please take the opportunity tomorrow, because you're going to have a gathering in Granby. I'd like to ask them to continue the discussion, to keep educating. I mean, if they have to call any of us on the panel, we can make ourselves available. Let's talk about Granby. Let's keep Granby on everybody's mind. So, Perez, as I slide over to you, it looks to me like you're not just a guy who used to carry lunch for your dad onto the estate. You're also a prolific musician. Is it my understanding that you played what? Is it basketball or soccer or something? Tell us about that as you close.
Well, yeah. Well, actually, I was a member of the Dominica side in '69. You know, I was an island player. But we started our basketball movements in the churchyard in Grand Bay. Again, Piero, Dogan, the same group of guys. Because the priests allowed the YCW people to put up a wooden pole to play netball. And then guys like Willie Favre and others, we wanted to play basketball. So we were given permission to put concrete and build it up. So we did just that, and we started playing and practicing and stuff, and we would take on Cardinals and the others, and we actually won a championship. I forget what year, but it was written in the Sun newspaper. So from that time, Grand Bay was known as a basketball powerhouse too, you know, because we won a championship. We beat them guys, you know, and we had our fans in town. And it was myself, Piero, Roy Tong, Dogan, Lambert Henderson. You're a good basketballer too.
You know, Perez, Dogan is somebody I tried my best to contact to be with us tonight. I know that he played his role and he had some leadership, but really and truly, I tried my best to get him. I did not succeed. I really wish we would have had him here with us tonight. So maybe you might tell us a little bit about Dogan.
Okay, well, Dogan, Eugene Douglas, was, you would call it what you really call a leader, because he was a little older than the average us, but you would always take on the initiatives to do things. And usually, sometimes troublesome things, but never, let's say, bad things. But positive things, and, like, it was a kind of inspiration to do things, And I remember the incident about the truck filled with coconuts that Manchild talked about. He was the one who jumped on board and just started throwing everything out for the villagers, man, and people were, and that time it was a kind of shock, because that was happening, their history was happening, and people knew things were changing, but we never had an idea it would come to be that radical, And Dogan is the one who organized to build the court, to get the cement and, put the string and get everything, because we were young, a little younger. But he was the chief organizer for the construction and setting up. And he wasn't really too interested in learning to play and to be part of the team. But he would practice with us on the time. He never really, he was more at the back, and leading us on. And something else that happened in Grand Bay, once we was involved with music, and we planned a fair at the old police station in Tetlali. A lot of guys would remember about that. And we formed a small group and organized everything. We made a raffle. The first prize was a pot of dumpling and maniku. And everything was okay. But Duncan was a leader, you know, a leader in the community, and we all looked up to him because he would inspire us to do things, but not bad things really, you know, things to at the time look bold, you know, bold, but you know, to reassure that, you know, we must not be afraid, you know. And in the Geneva thing, he played a crucial role on the sides, you know, on the sides to really make people realize that things are going to change, and things really did. Now, for my book, actually, what I did while we were speaking, I still have Manchild's link on my phone. So a lot of the people who were questioning on the chat about the book, so I put about 5, 6, 7 links to people so they can get his book, you know. And mine now is it's simple, rasperez.com. That's my website, rasperez.com. As you open page 1, the book it's available in English and French and German. So Dr. Andre is Canada is English, so you'll get it. So rasperez.com, and it's right there. And French for the francophones, German for the, like, all my friends here ask me, what are you doing lately? So I sell books on the street for them too, you know, and what, you know. Instead of now, it's instead of music, because people don't usually buy CDs again, they'll stream it online. But a book, a physical book, I didn't have any ebook, just physical copies. So they still go one, and still available online, you know, although I haven't checked how many been sold, because I made it to get around and not to really make big Stephen King stuff, you know. Yeah.
Well,
So, yeah, I also want to say thank you very much for having me tonight, and for everybody who's looking and everything, friends reaching out. Yeah, everything's kind of cool, but we have to do something to get Granby back to its rightful place, you know, cultural and every capital of Dominica.
I certainly agree with that. We need to do everything we can as people of Granby. I mean, we know Granby can be a lot more than it is now. We know Granby was destined to be a lot more than it is now. And we know that the young people of Granby, many of them have left the shores and they've gone elsewhere, but they're doing very well. They're smart, they're educated, they're talented, whether it's culture, whether it's whatever. Every time I hear of a carnival queen show or princess show, Granby always winning those things. It seems to me that the Granby is still leading in culture, leading in talent, leading in. I mean, we didn't get a chance to name all these intellectuals that have come from Granby, but many, many intellectuals came from Granby. I think Granby and Marigot seem to have been competing for intellectuals in Dominica at one time. So I think big up to both Granby and Marigot in that regard. But Crispin, as I go to you, I mean, really, I'm happy that we did this program tonight. And I believe a lot of people of Granby, young people in particular, are much better informed now than they were before. So I'm happy that we could do this tonight.
You know, Sheridan, this was a tremendous program. Beyond my wild expectations. There's so much we couldn't cover because of time, but I think collectively, Dr. Andre, Manchild, Perez, and Manai, I think we all made a tremendous contribution to the knowledge about Granby, because not many people knew about what really happened in '74. In fact, I wanted to say that one of the things that was most disappointing for me about the whole Geneva uprising was the response of the Nassifs. You know, Yvonne Nassif wrote two articles in the Chronicle entitled "The True Lesson of Geneva." And I just want to read one little, not even a paragraph, but a few lines in there, which really was disturbing to me. He was chastising the priest, Father Moody, who I believe it was on the anniversary of the revolution, maybe on the 25th anniversary. Granby had somewhat kind of a celebration, and he wrote a very scathing attack on the Granby people. But he says here, and I'm going to quote, he says, on the other, he says, similarly, drawing a parallel between Geneva 1974 and previous uprisings is ill-conceived. On the one hand, slaves struck out for their freedom. On the other, a bunch of malcontents decided to strike at a man because he was white and successful. I need not say more, but I was dismayed to read that. But there's one other thing I should say, which should go down in history and hasn't been said tonight, and that is Mr. Nassif, after the Geneva Uprising, wrote a letter to the chief of police, the commissioner of police, and sent him a check of $500 for taking care of his property, and a check to the head of the defense force for $1,000, thanking him for taking care of his property during the uprising. Well, he had the idea he was coming back. But anyway, the Premier Leblanc had the check sent back. And I actually have the letter that goes with both checks that were returned by the Permanent Secretary, Allington Riviere, directed by Mr. Leblanc. And Mr. Leblanc said what he could advise Mr. Nassif to do is to sell land to the Granby people in that letter. So with that, I'm just very pleased, Sheridan, that you have really saluted the 50th anniversary of the Granby Revolution. You are also from Granby. I'm sure you're proud of what our people have achieved. The point is that Mr. Nassif never got it. It was inevitable that there was going to be a revolution there after all what had transpired from slavery days and after slavery. I need not say more. I thank everybody for listening. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Crispin. Thanks for that. And Dr. Irving Andre, I'm pretty sure that you have some more that you'd like to add as you make your closing remarks. But certainly, I think the comment that Crispin just read there, seemed to have raised some eyebrows from that article.
Well, my eyebrows are not raised. I do have copies of the two letters. I think Christine may be mistaken, actually. The letter to the Defense Force, I think was 1005. And the person to who it was addressed was Major, the deceased, Twistleton Bertrand, who just happens to have been my father-in-law. In fact, the letter I made reference to the letter in the book I did on Mr. Leblanc. But here's the inconvenient truth about Granby and perhaps where we are today. The inconvenient truth is this. It tells us what or who as a society we value. Now, the point has been making this evening, Granby has produced a number of intelligent intellectuals, accomplished persons, and so on. But the fact of the matter is, in the public consciousness, Granby is still viewed, perhaps not as much as before, but still viewed today as a place where the whole question of intellectualism is conspicuous by its absence. Granby is a village where those who live there have to be taken for granted because of their humble antecedents, because quite frankly, they're not regarded as perhaps talented as those who reside in urban spaces, as those perhaps who look in a different fashion, as those who have money. And that is the unfortunate truth. I mean, Granby has been a fount of significant cultural upheaval. But again, that has not been received as something worthwhile, something worth preserving, but something as less than equal. Not as equal as having a big fat bank account. And that is part of the problem. Granby reminds us that we still have a long way to go in terms of the significance or lack thereof we place on certain persons from certain areas in Dominica. persons from Marigot, Wesley, they bear the same stigma. And we have to confront these stereotypes head on. And we have to give the persons of Granby, hopefully, the fortitude, mental or otherwise, to realize that, quite frankly, theirs is a proud history, one which they should not ignore. They should not ignore those local disciples among them who have written, who've documented the history of their community, who've made a contribution, not by establishing commercial edifices, but trying to improve and advance the social and the intellectual life of the area. And perhaps when we start valuing these persons, there's been numerous references to Pierre Charles. No, I don't know, but how was he treated by the political directorate? Your good friend Paul, what's his name? Paul what again?
Paul
The caller
Alexander.
this evening. Paul Alexander should call you and tell you, how was Pierre Charles treated by the political directorate in January 2004? They treated him as a pariah, someone without a university education. They told him, we will not contest another election. Ask Crispin Gregoire. He's right there. They will not contest another election with him at the helm. He's not smart enough. He only went to high school. Let us confront the inconvenience truths not only tonight, but also on Sunday afternoon. And with these words I pray, and I thank your listeners for staying up at such an ungodly time and listen to 6-5 Dominicans over their prime who were speaking nostalgically and hopefully optimistically of what will be as opposed to what might have been. So I thank you.
And I thank you so much, Dr. Andre. I want to thank also all the folks who are still with us on Facebook and on YouTube and on other platforms. I mean, I really appreciate you being here tonight. All the comments I've seen so far have really been very positive and encouraging comments. And I'm pretty sure that Perez, you're getting comments, and Crispin, you're getting comments, and Man Charlie may be getting, and Dr. Andre. We're all getting comments. I'm getting lots of comments on my phone. One person said, listen, there has to be a part 2 of that program. I don't know whether we're going to have to be able to do this. We have many other programs that we have to do, but we'll see if that can happen. Certainly, it was very, for me, invigorating, enlightening, and I'm enthused by what I've been hearing. What I would like to, last what I'd like to leave as we say goodnight is for the younger generation of Granby to know your value, know what the people before you have accomplished. You need to build on that and take it to the next level. In other words, you should not really be looking for handouts. These people did not look for handouts. They took a stand and they made a demand. They said, we're not going to be, tenants anymore. No, we're not going to be tenants anymore. We want our own piece of the pie. And they're able to get it. So this is the point, I think. This is the lesson for the young people. They have to understand that if you really need something and it's a good thing and you know what you're doing is right, take a stand. Stand up for it and insist on it. And don't let up until you get it. So I'm hoping that on Sunday when the Electoral Reform Coalition Group, and it represents all of the various organizations in Dominica, I hope that they will also remember some of the things that we said here tonight, and they will know where they are. In fact, they will understand that they're in Granby, a place where history was made, a place where leadership really took effect and played a role in inspiring the rest of the country. And so I hope that they certainly, when they're there, they will certainly look very closely at Pierre Charles' legacy. And whatever they say, whatever they do, I hope that will contribute in a meaningful way to establishing and promoting his legacy, because he was a lot to Granby and it should mean a lot to the people of Granby. So as we say goodnight, I just want to say goodnight to Lambi, goodnight to Sherwin, goodnight to all the folks on Facebook and YouTube, all the other platforms, on all the frequencies in every nook and cranny in Dominica, in the region, and globally, that are part of the Q family of listeners. Thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you, Dr. Andre. Thank you, Crispin. Thank you, Manchild. Thank you, Perez and Manai. It's good to have you all here tonight. Appreciate that. We should do this again sometime if we have a chance. Okay? And let's also reach out to Duggan because we didn't get him, but we really should have had him here with us. So I just want to say good night to everybody. We'll see you again another time. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, good
Everybody,
night. Good night. Take
all
care.
right.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Yo.
Moving.